Welcome to the Wild Physio podcast with your host, Andrew Wild. Today, I welcome Jason Agosta, who is a podiatrist based in Melbourne, Australia. Jason has had an interesting career, to say the least. Jason was a university lecturer for 6 years and has also worked as a podiatrist in private practice and with professional sporting teams, including the Essendon AFL Club, Boo the Bombers, Up the Roos, Melbourne Rebels, Rugby Union, and has worked at the Australian Open tennis for 17 years. Interestingly, Jason had an extensive break from working clinically as a podiatrist to pursue media commitments, including hosting health and sports segments for Channel 9 and ABC Radio. A huge welcome to the first podiatrist that's been on the Wild Physio podcast, Jason Agosta. Welcome.
Oh, that's big. The first one.
I know.
Is that right?
I actually had to go through all of my podcasts to see whether I have had one, and I don't think I have. So
is that right?
The pressure is on. So all the podiatrists out there that are listening, they're going to be waiting to hear what you've got to say because you're obviously the expert.
Oh, is that right? So there's no pressure.
There's no pressure.
It's interesting, isn't it, when we speak and we talk about introductions and, the 20 things that you've done in your working life and then you get to this point, and I can see that I'm, so much older than you too, Andrew. So you get to this stage, like 35 years of practice down the track, and all those things actually don't mean that much. The teams you're involved with, and that it doesn't actually mean that much. And the people ride on them a fair bit, but I've always seen like, you know what? Well, yeah, so what? Helped out of an AFL team for 23 years, but it didn't really, I didn't think it really made me much better as a person or a practitioner. And it certainly being associated with those teams hasn't, and I don't think it does, put you on another level of professionalism or another level of dealing with elite sports people in some way, but I think there's a perception that it does.
I think
I've never seen it like that, and I've never.
I think
felt
within the
actually...
profession, though, I think within the profession of, say, podiatry or physio or whatever it is, I think fellow physios and podiatrists put probably more emphasis on what that clinician has done in their career than probably the general public do. So,
yes.
like, if you look at, say, there's a titled APA physiotherapist around the corner that's done. They're a sports physiotherapist, but the general public have no idea what a titled musculoskeletal or sports physio is compared to someone that hasn't done a master's. And it doesn't mean that you can charge more, and the general public probably don't know what the hell that means. So I somewhat agree with you. I look at your bio and think, all right, he's done some really cool stuff. He's obviously well experienced. He's been around the block. And he obviously knows what he's talking about. But I think the general public don't necessarily look at that and think, okay, they're legit just based off that. It's an interesting conversation about that.
I think you're right, though. I think maybe within the professions, you may be seen in a different light. But at the end of the day, do you know what I mean? When someone walks into your rooms, you're just you. Maybe you've gathered that experience just over the 35 years of practice, and in between those things, I don't think that really have made that much difference. I'm lucky enough to still be involved with a group of people with track and field at the highest level, and because that's been my background as a runner and my passion still, I'm still fascinated with it. And I think that gives you a certain experience of dealing with those athletes or those types of people. You get older and grayer, and you learn how to handle the intensity and the desperation and the parents and the coaches that come with it. I think you become really experienced at the management of it, of that scenario, rather than probably the clinical side of it, which I think is a big deal. So, and hopefully you can relay some confidence from that experience, which I think is important.
A lot of it comes down to communication. It's much like in the coaching side of things. You look at an AFL coach, a lot of the time they're just managing people and personalities. And I feel like a lot of our job is similar to that, where we're managing people, their personalities, their experiences, their expectations, and the parents as well, when you're in a coaching scenario. So
There's a lot of that.
Further to what you were saying before about your running, I needed to probably pump your tires up here, mate. So
Nah.
your PBs in running, it's on your website. I need to quote it. Your 1500 meters PB is 3 minutes 45, 3K is 8:08, 5K is 13 minutes 48. That's flying, and 10Ks is 29 minutes. Under 30 minutes for 10K. That's red hot.
But, you know, in comparison to what goes on now, and also at that stage, to make Barcelona, I would have had to have been another, I think it was about another 70 meters down the track, about 60 or 70 meters down the track to make
so
that.
Was that the 5K? Goal? Was that the goal?
Oh, absolutely. There was such a one-dimensional life going on. And and we're talking about experiences of you know, dealing with people and that, you know, that understanding, that depth of knowledge, but the depth of understanding about what goes into it and who these people are in striving for, you know, whatever they're trying to do. There's no doubt that plays a huge role at that level. Were those runs really any good? Like, they might have been in that time back then, but now, and you know, there's a ton of people who can run 3:45. That's
it's like the 4 minute mile.
Yeah, that would have been about a 4:2 mile or something, probably. Yeah. But yeah, I always remember that. I remember walking away from 13:48 thinking, you know what, I need to run 13:32 or something like that, or you know, get further down the track. So there was still a little. It sounds like a little gap, but it was huge. Yeah, for sure.
You obviously have a love for running, and was that one of the reasons why you went down the route that you did and go and do podiatry at university and work clinically as a podiatrist?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I always went through high school wanting to be a PE teacher, and then at the last minute I looked at the health sciences of physio and podiatry, and podiatry just sort of grabbed hold of me as soon as I started reading about it. And I thought, you know what, there's no one in the country doing what is happening in the States. And I just was reading up on it and looking into it, and I've just become really fascinated with it. And it seemed very relevant to running. And fortunately for me, with the running background combined with the podiatric background, I'm still really so happy with it and passionate and really enthusiastic about it after all these years. And I love it. And I've also made sure that I haven't drained myself and done too much of it as well. I've made sure there's a really good balance of work and time off. And yeah, that's been really important. Yeah.
And you obviously did a sort of a big 180 there in the middle of your career, and you went into media and hosting some of those health and sports segments for Channel 9 and ABC Radio. And I found that fascinating because obviously I'm hosting this podcast and I really enjoy this side of things. So with that in mind, so how did that all come about? Because you obviously have the gift of the gab by the sounds of it. Like, we've never actually met in person, and I feel like it's been a very natural progression as soon as we got online and we were having a really good chat. So
for sure.
How did that all come about?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a radio station in Melbourne here, 3RRR, and a friend of mine who's an exercise physiologist had a show up called Run Like You Stole Something. and Run Like You Stole Something, I was brought into that with Justin Kemp, the exercise physio, and we just hit it off. And for 12 and a half years, we ran this show on sport health and health science, and how we didn't get into trouble from some of the things we said about people and calling this one boring or whatever. I don't know how we got away with it, but that led to the Channel 9, and I hosted a health segment for a while. And at that stage, I had, after 12 and a half years of being in a sports medicine center, I got to a point in that center of going in as a practitioner and sitting on a board and having a managerial role, and there was too much going on, and I just jumped ship. And I had 6 months off at the same time as the radio station was going on. ABC started with Francis Leach, and the Channel 9 hosting started. And for 6 months, I had off practice. I was doing a little bit of that media and just training and surfing my brains out basically for 6 months. And It's an interesting question or interesting thing to talk about, because that 6 months gave me the time to regenerate and think about what I wanted to do, and really was a period of just recharge. And I've got absolutely no doubt that that time, after 12 and a half years or 13 and a half years of practice, had 6 months off and then just got back into it, running my own rooms in East Melbourne in an orthopedic setting, that has contributed to still being really enthusiastic and really passionate about, the running scene and what goes on podiatrically. So one thing did lead to another, unintentionally, but yeah, here we are.
You kind of just fell into it in a way.
Yeah. And I don't think I still don't think I'm that good at it. I just love passing on things to people, and I'm fascinated with people. And that's where the Champion show started as well. Yeah, just listening
we were gonna speak about that, but before we
Yeah.
do, I was gonna mention that Stephanie Brance has been on the podcast before, and she mentioned a similar sort of scenario with
That was a great show you did with her. I listened to that. I loved it.
Thank you.
Well done.
And it was very interesting how she fell into it. The fact that it was just her next door neighbor.
Yeah.
What are the
Yeah.
chances? Sometimes these things come up and you just fall into a job, or you fall into a different avenue in terms of your career, and away you go. So
Yeah.
Speaking of, so your show, The Champion Within, let's have a bit of a chat about that, what it is and what the plan is going forward with that.
Yeah, well, there's certainly no plan. It's more that has come about just really about being fascinated with people. And like we do with ourselves during the day, I think the big driver is just being so interested in people, not just the problems they present to our rooms, but learning about them, what goes on behind the scenes. And everyone's got such fascinating stories. And yeah, I just love that. And so I decided to start a show. And that was on the back burner for a while because of the Podiatry podcast, the Simply the Best Podiatry, which has been going for 4 or 5 months now. But the Champion Within show is about just speaking to people who have really fascinating stories, and they might be inspiring for some people, and they may not be. So the first few episodes have been with a guitarist, Shane O'Mara, and then we've got a badminton player who's at Tokyo Olympics up this week. So it's really quite diverse. Tony Shaw was a Collingwood Football Club, premiership captain in 1990. He was up, and Alison Inverarity, she's a triple Olympian high jumper. People with great variation in their backgrounds, but amazing stories about themselves and how they handled themselves, and coaching, and their perspective on how things should be done athletically, or just like musically, or from a business point of view, perhaps. Yeah,
it sounds a little bit like the Howie Games podcast, how he
very
interviews
much
a lot of sports stars, and it's a very positive podcast. They're talking about their journey through life, but also at the end, it's about what are some of the things you could impart on the younger generation. And
yes.
I love it. It's funny you mention it, because about what yours is going to be, because I think Howie never thought at any point he'd be interviewing Bernard Fanning. He's now doing an artist series, and I've actually nearly preferred the artist series, where I've listened to the Bernard Fanning one was brilliant, and I didn't realize he was so into cricket until after I listened to it. And it was quite amusing, the fact that the first part of the podcast, the first 25 minutes, they literally just talked about cricket. And I was like, how good's Bernard Fanning? What a legend.
Yeah, so cool. So cool.
Really cool.
Yeah, but it's that sort of thing. Like, Shane's episode talks about, I love imparting the stories that help people with themselves, maybe coach them along to a certain point. I think coaching on many fronts, particularly, say, with my background with athletics, is done so poorly. It's just incredibly poor. In the tennis circles, I've been involved in that a lot. And, if us with experience over so many years can impart a story or simple tips that people can maybe think about or change their ways, I think that's a huge thing. So like, for instance, Shane O'Mara, he came on, was talking about the worst performance ever been angst ridden, standing on stage, missed the first note, and it was just a disaster. And then he talks about getting his shit together and being composed and walking out into Hamer Hall, in front of 3,000 people playing solo, and just saying to himself, I've got this. I've got this. Looking into the eyes of Chris Chaney from The Living End, who's probably the best guitarist the country's seen. And Shane just said, yeah, I got this, and just nails it perfectly. All because of just turning confidence around within and being composed and looking at himself and realizing what he had to do to make a stand and not get into that vortex of, decline in a crucial moment, which is what happens with athletes or anyone really. When the heat's on, how are you going to handle yourself?
I 100% agree with that. Your psychological status before an event, or you've got to play at school or something like that, going into it, and if you have a negative mindset, it makes such a difference.
Totally.
Massive difference.
So
some days you feel better than others, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But as soon as you line up and you have to do something, those characteristics of yourself, you have to make them come true to yourself, don't you? The deep breath, composure, and the strength and the toughness and the confidence within. You've got to bring that to the fore at different times.
What I found interesting recently was watching the US Open. I was watching Coco Gauff, and I don't know whether you noticed, but when they do a close up of Coco when she was returning, she actually is talking to herself. Yeah. And you could see a couple of times when she was talking to herself, she was just saying, breathe, slow down. Mm-hmm. She was saying really basic things. And no doubt someone in her camp has told her to do these things to try and get the heart rate down, to think clearly, to not make a rash decision, to get into a flow state. So I found that really fascinating. And I find that fascinating how these elite athletes get to this flow state more often. So someone like a Novak Djokovic, he's been dominating for close to 20 years now, and he consistently turns up and he gets it done. Over and over and over again. And his mind is just so strong.
Strong in staying composed and knowing how to do that. And people have different ways of doing that, which is what I find interesting. And that's one of the things I learned from being involved with Australian Open for so long, is that a standout for me was Maria Sharapova. And people will always would have seen the cold, hard approach on court. But every time she walked back beyond the baseline, she'd turn around, fiddle with her strings, but you'd see her sort of like, take this huge deep breath. And then she just sort of took a moment to just get centered, and then she'd turn around and knock your block off. Yeah. And, did it consistently. I think she was probably one of the better ones and one of the really interesting people I sort of dealt with over a long period of time, and did it amazingly well. The other young person in the tennis circuit was interesting was Elena Rybakina, the young girl who won Wimbledon last year. Yep. And I remember the first time that she walked in, there was this amazing sense that this young woman, and she was so young, was so calm and so composed. She was just so together. In 20 seconds, you could sense it. And then I really took note of what was going on, and watched her just line up and just belt people off the court. And a couple of times, speaking to her, not only was this beautiful, beautiful composure, but you could actually start to sense that there was this complete animal beneath the surface. And then I'm not sure where she finished that year, 2 years ago, but then she went on and won Wimbledon, and she's like right up there in the top 2 or 3. Amazing. There's this great balance, and I love seeing that with the athletes too, and trying to coach that along, or get people aware of how they need to handle themselves. And that's part of the mentoring thing, and with mostly the runners and some of the young tennis players. And that's why the shows come about too, trying to impart some of that from all different backgrounds. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well,
but Andrew, it's no different to you and I clinically though. Like, if we don't take our time if we don't listen, how can we give any physio or any podiatrist, how can we give the best clear advice? There's, you're running the consultation and things like, but the consultation is not about us. But if we don't take our time and be composed, you can't gather all that you need.
Yeah, it comes with experience, and finding that flow state in my work is something that I try and, I switch it on and I'm in that zone for that certain amount of time. And I've always been good at sort of switching it on, switching it off. But it comes with time and practice. And I've gotten better at, I suppose, leaving work behind and not worrying as much about it and forgetting about the patients a little bit after the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? Not taking their problems home with you.
Yeah.
And that takes, I think it really just takes time and practice and just maturity at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about that. As far as a few quick questions, was work-life balance. How do you maintain that? Because you've got so much going on from what I can see with the online courses and doing this sort of thing. And then, the strength and conditioning and the physio side of things.
I think it's easier to maintain a work-life balance, I think, when you really love what you do, because I don't ever dread going to work. Do you know what I mean? Like, I enjoy it. I have a good time. Yeah, it's me. And I love the grind, and I love challenging myself and trying different things. So I really enjoy that. But from trying to balance things, I've gotten better over the years, definitely, especially in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. I've gotten better at trying to leave work where it is, and when I get home, it's done. And I've got a lot of things that I do outside of work that keep me sort of level and measured, I suppose.
That's what I was going to ask. What do you do outside?
Yeah. So I try and play golf once or twice a week if I can. Play tennis once or twice a week as well. I lift weights probably 3 to 4 times a week, depending on the week. And then I'll jump on the bike every now and then. I don't really ever go for a run anymore. Not huge on the long distance, slow running. I'd prefer to sprint, and I love ball sports. So give me a ball, I'm happy. So I've got a fair bit of activity during the week that I try and get done. So I suppose the number one thing is just exercise and sport. It's always been a huge part of my life. So that's something that I have to do per week. Otherwise, I just feel off, weird. I don't sleep very well if I don't exercise. So
no, you just don't stay centered.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's always
There's a certain wiring, isn't there? There's like a wiring of our sort of our systems, and if it doesn't work, if it's not turned on or turned off the right way, we're gone.
Definitely. I'm so competitive as well. I'm playing best of 3 sets this afternoon with a mate, and we're both very similar in terms of quality of tennis player, and it's always a fight to the end. So I love it. I go into it every week, and I've just got game face on. So it's it's good fun to have that competitiveness still. That I haven't given up sport. Like a lot of my friends have, even on the weekend, on Sunday, we'll play golf, and instead of just going out and having a hit, like we'll play a match, 2v2 in a match, and there's like some shit talk going on, and, we're challenging ourselves. So I really love that side of things.
Why physiotherapy? Because I know you had an extensive strength and conditioning background, and you obviously saw something that was either missing with what you were doing, or you just had a passion for something that took you to another level.
Yeah. And for the listeners as well, obviously I've introduced Jason here, and the podcast has turned into now his podcast.
Well, so this is going up on mine.
We're cross-pollinating here. So just for the listeners out there, why physio? I was injured a lot as an adolescent. So I played every sport known to man in Wagga, where I grew up, playing Aussie rules cricket, water polo, tennis, golf, and I got injured a lot sort of from the age of 15 onwards, and I had stress fractures in my back. I had multiple concussions. So I was regularly at the physio. So I thought, it seems like a cool profession. I wanted to do something in health. I wanted to do something sciencey because I love science. My dad was a dentist, so I'd seen him as a kid. I saw him helping people, and I kind of liked that idea of helping people. I considered medicine. I considered dentistry. Didn't really want to look in mouths all day. So then physio seemed to, it just matched up a little bit, you know, the sport side of things combined with the injuries, combined with the science and me wanting to help people. So I went down the physio route the second year out of school. First year, I kind of went down the footy route a little bit and did a little bit of, I started at Sydney Uni doing economics and I hated it.
Oh, right. Okay.
And then following year started physio and really enjoyed it. There was a lot of subjects that I thought were ridiculous, as you would have as well back then. And still there's some subjects at university that you just have to do it just to tick it off.
Sure.
And then got into private practice, wanted to do musculoskeletal sports physio and loved it and just stuck at it. And 12 years later, I'm still here doing my job.
That's it.
That a lot of people leave, you know, like the attrition rate of physio and podiatry is not great. So
50% within 5 years for both professions. And
amazing.
I think people go through and they come out and they realize that it's much harder than they first thought. I think that's one thing. But more importantly, I think that unless you have found your fascinations that keep you going during the day and you're passionate about people, it's going to be incredibly hard to keep it going. And I think you've just explained that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing you just touched on, sorry.
My fascination probably was because I was a young athlete, I loved Aussie rules. In an ideal world, I would have got drafted and played AFL football at the highest level, but having those stress fractures in my back, sort of the age of 16, 17, 18, I just missed so much football. I played about 16 games over about sort of 2 and a bit years.
Doing too much too soon?
Too soon, grew really quickly, was super skinny, hadn't been exposed to the gym or load management or anything like that. I'd seen a lot of different physios that, looking back, weren't doing the best job with me. And then the multiple concussions on top of that. So, you know, my fascination has been to try and help these kids. And this is why I love working at Riverview, the private school here, with the young boys that are sort of 12 up to 18, and trying to help them make sure they don't make the mistakes that I probably did back then.
Yeah.
And help them achieve their dreams and their goals and reach the stars. You know, that'd be every young athlete that I see. I think of myself in them in a little bit and think, all right, I wish I had someone like myself in my corner back then.
Sure, exactly.
So
I totally get it. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And I think you touched on it, that poor, if you haven't had the systems around you or people, just even one person to guide you correctly at that crucial time, the story could have been completely different.
Agreed.
Do you know I've had one person, she was an Olympic title holder, one person, I had a journey with her through her career, running career. One person has said to me in my whole time that, you know what, it just wasn't meant to be. You're supposed to be doing what you're doing. And I'd realized that, but it was just seen in beautiful context, because the same thing went down, didn't have someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're growing so fast into 6'3" or whatever you are. You're an amazing footballer. You've been knocked around the block a few times. It's time just to chill out for 6 months. Let's get fit and strong and come back and try and aim for a full season instead of just going bang, bang against the brick wall. And that poor support network around, say, like in my field of being on the, you know, with athletes on the track, it is so poorly done. Because any coach can say, Andrew, do 600 to 800s this week, and next week we're going to do this, and next week we're going to do that. But the development of you as a person, as a footballer and a runner, sometimes you'd need that person to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're not going to play AFL next year, but maybe you will in 3 years' time. Just cool your jets. And it just doesn't happen enough, which is what you've just touched on.
And what happened to me is definitely has made me a better clinician, because the concussions eventually got to the point where I had to retire. I just turned 20. I had to retire because of too many of them. So I retired back in 2008. So it was a long time ago. And look, at the end of the day, you know, I never got picked up from by an AFL club, and I was never close. And at the end of the day, I probably wasn't good enough. But in the back of my mind, I felt like I probably could get there if things had fallen
Yeah.
into place.
But more importantly, not reaching your potential, whether that was
Oh,
at that level or not. It was just
exactly.
being the best you could be. People miss
Exactly.
that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's probably, I wouldn't have cared if I never made the AFL, if I just kept playing football through my 20s and I got into my 30s. And even if I was playing now, if I'd gotten through it, I would have been able to reach my potential and know that I put everything into it. But I felt I was really jaded in my early 20s because I felt like I had missed out,
Yeah. Okay.
because I hadn't been able to fulfill my potential and play football for years on end to see how good I could have become.
That's it.
And I felt hard done by. And it was like,
Yes.
poor me, like I've
Yeah.
had to retire and all of my friends are playing at a good level, or I had other mates that actually had been drafted. And that was hard to take. And I remember every sort of April, May, I'd go through this grieving period where all I'd want to do was play,
Yeah.
but I knew I couldn't. So I distanced myself from football. I didn't do anything. I didn't coach or anything for about 5 years. And then eventually I went down the coaching route for about 3 years, and I really enjoyed it. And then I left it for a while, and then I
Yeah.
came back. And I think that journey has definitely made me a better clinician, because I feel
There's
like
no doubt.
it's probably made me a little softer and helped me empathize with people and me to
Sure.
understand human psychology a little bit
Yeah.
more. So, and I think you're
Have you?
right though. Definitely, like, you definitely need a sort of a coach or a mentor or someone in your corner that's that catalyst to help you achieve your goals.
Outside
And
perspective.
yeah, 100%.
And most
I
of the time,
feel
the
like every
parents,
Howie Games podcast guest says the same thing. It was
yeah,
this coach or this person or my dad or whoever it is. They were the ones that really helped me fulfill my
yeah,
potential.
yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, across the board, as I was saying, it's so poorly done, especially in track and field. It's just, and the parents are too close and have very poor perspective to be the people who can guide you, on that right. It's very rare to have that parental guidance, which is on a great level, because they see things in a completely different light. And usually the individual involved doesn't want to listen anyway. Tell
Agreed.
me, can I just ask you, is this the first time you've spoken about this on your show, about you?
Yeah, it would be. I've
It's
touched on it
great.
before. I've touched on it before when I've been on other podcasts where they've asked me a little bit about my journey,
Sure.
but I've never sort of delved further into it. And
That's good. You
I've,
know
to be
what you're
honest,
doing?
I've never talked about, other than to some closer friends, family. I've never really talked about the problems I had around in my early 20s with the fact that I had retired from a game I
Yeah.
loved so young.
And
I
how heavy
struggled.
it was. It
Yeah,
just hung
it was
heavy,
really
obviously.
heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
every year, like I'd struggle to watch AFL on TV
Yeah,
because,
right.
and it
Yeah.
wasn't about me wanting to play in the AFL at the top level. It was just like, I want to play,
Yeah.
I want to kick a footy. I want to kick a
Yeah.
goal. I want to take a mark.
Yeah.
But I had just been dealt this blow that just frustrated the hell out of me. I was like,
Yeah.
and the most frustrating thing about it was I was so fit, healthy, well, strong,
Yeah.
and the only thing I couldn't do was just cop any contact.
Right. Okay.
So I was like, this game that I loved, that was my number one game, I can do it, but I can only do it if I am guaranteed I can't get concussed.
Right. I was going to say, because that's because of their head injuries, obviously.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They were obviously quite significant.
there was enough of them. Yeah, I had about 9 to 10 concussions,
Oh, yeah.
and
Wow.
I had three when I was in my year 11, which was, I was about 16, 17, which was kind of the beginning of the end for me. And then I had that final big concussion in 2008, and I had to pull the pin. When
Right.
I went back to coaching back home in Wagga, my first year out of university, I went home to Wagga and worked at a clinic there. And I was an assistant coach at a football club back there. And I did the preseason with the boys because I could. I was
Yeah.
fit
Yeah.
well. I could do all
Yeah.
of the stuff that was non-contact. And I got through halfway through the preseason and I wasn't supposed to play. And and they were struggling for numbers and we didn't have the greatest side. So I thought, you know what, bugger it. I'm going to put the boots on and I played when I shouldn't have. I played 13 games,
Really?
I think it was. Yeah, 13 games, and I just literally sat at full forward and tried to take a few hangers, kick a few goals, and I didn't really venture out of the 50
Trying
much
to
and
be the
tried to not,
legend.
yeah, tried not to put my head where I shouldn't. And I got
Yeah.
through the year without a concussion, and I thought, thank God that I didn't
Yeah.
get one. And I
Yeah.
thought, no, that's it. I'm done. I need to pull the pin. And
Yeah.
thank
It's
God I
smart.
did. Thank
Yeah.
God I did. But still, even then, every year, I'd be thinking about, I'm going to go back and I'll play in Wagga, or I'll play down in Albury, or I'll fly down, or I'll play in Sydney here or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it probably took me until my late 20s, early 30s to get to that point where I felt comfortable with the decision, but also I didn't feel like, oh, poor me. I didn't feel as jaded. I didn't have a chip on my shoulder about it. I think it also helped when some of my friends that had played football for pretty much their whole life were starting to retire. So that probably helped. But
Yeah.
now I
Okay.
love it. Like tonight, tomorrow night, I'll watch the footy.
Yeah.
I'm working at Review and in a coaching capacity and physio capacity, and I love it. So I feel like I've gotten to that point where I've come to terms with it, and I'm
Sure.
lucky that
Yeah.
I love other sports and I can play other sports. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's great that you can talk about it on your show and mine, because what you're doing, you're putting yourself in people's living rooms to have more of an understanding about you, the bloke behind wild physio and fitness. It's really cool. It does take a long time to get there, though, and be content with that scenario of dropping out, doesn't it? But in
Oh,
your
definitely.
case, it was obviously the smartest and the long-term right move. But have there been any long-term effects from your head injuries?
You tell me.
I don't know. First time I've
have I
met you
have I
face
slurred
to
my
face.
words at all? No, there hasn't. I was really lucky. I had an amazing neurologist early on when I had that final concussion in 2008 that
Yeah,
told me that you're done. I had some significant issues with symptoms for about 6 months after that concussion,
such
where I
as
used to. So I had the concussion, I saw the neurologist about a week later. There's one test where they do, it's called the Fukuda step test, where you just stand on the spot and you put your hands out in front, like you're kind of marching, like sort of Frankenstein, and then
yeah,
close
yeah.
your eyes, march on the spot, and for 30 seconds, and then you open your eyes. And I remember I started facing here, and then I'd done a full 180 and I was facing the other way, and I still thought I was in the same spot.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
then during that consult,
My
they go through the
God.
cognitive testing and everything. And one of the cognitive tests was name as many words as you can in 30 seconds, starting with F. And I just sat there and I could get 3. I said, I remember saying frog, fuck, and fallopian.
Okay.
And I sat there, my mum was next to me. I remember sitting there and I went bright red. I was like, how ridiculous. For 30 seconds, I can only get 3. I just
Right.
felt like the biggest dead shit, like for a lack of a better term.
Yeah. Okay.
I just felt it was so embarrassing. And I walked out of that being like, okay, I've got to seriously consider retirement here when he's telling me to retire. Because
Mm.
prior to it, I was like, nah, it'll be right. I'll sort it out.
Was that
And then
your
for
moment of realization, though?
moment of
The three
realization
Fs.
was, yeah, it
Was
was
that like,
probably, it was probably that combined with the fact that I used to go, that was my first year of university doing physio. And I used to go into a lecture and I'd walk out of the lecture. And I remember standing around people and that were in the same lecture and they were talking about it. And I was like, I don't even remember that. Like, I
you
don't
weren't
even
even
know what
there?
I don't even remember that the lecture was on whatever it was. And I struggled immensely in that semester to the point where
Mm.
I actually failed one subject, but I got to sit the exam again because I'd only failed it by a little bit. And it was the first time I'd ever sort of failed any sort of academic thing in my life. And
Yeah.
that hit me pretty hard. And I also could not play golf for about 4 months because I used to get dizzy and feel like I was going to spew because the head moving really fast, kind of from contact up to look at the ball, I'd like get all dizzy and feel weird. I felt unbalanced and I couldn't hit the ball as well. So I had all of these sort of symptoms that carried on for about 6 months. So I was like, yeah, I need to retire.
So that's at
So
6 months. What happened after that, though?
it just gradually got a
Slowly
little bit,
improve?
yeah, it just gradually got better over time. And
Like how much time, though? Are we talking years
yeah,
or?
I think from a memory standpoint, I think it probably took me 18 months to 2 years to get back to normal.
Really?
Probably, my first, yeah, I'd say third year into, yeah, probably third year of university, I started to feel a little bit more normal. But it just took time. And, this is probably one of the reasons why I definitely shouldn't have played that year when I went back to Wagga when I had retired, but I got through it luckily. So it was a challenging time, definitely.
Sure. So this leads on to one of the things one of your great episodes on your show was with Jill Cook talking about tendinopathy. And what you and I are talking about today is our involvement or our past involvement of our activities and how that sort of is the foundations, obviously, to who we are, but our passion for our practices, both physio and podiatry, and it never wavers because of that us and our backgrounds. One thing Jill Cook said in your session talking about Achilles and patellar tendinopathy, you asked her, you said, so if you had any, last words of advice for a physiotherapist, and she said, just get off your ass and go to the gym. Every practitioner needs to get active and experience what it's like to get strong and be really active. And that reminded me that, you know what, the running background or the footy background that you have has been so crucial in developing who you are and developing your practice and being bloody good at it too, with the depth of understanding.
Oh, definitely. I think, you can kind of break it up into different pillars of sort of professional development of, seeing your patients face to face, listening to podcasts and YouTubes, reading books. But the other pillar is actually doing exercise yourself.
No doubt.
Because you've got to put yourself in the trenches and understand what it feels like. When I'm talking with my patients about, building muscle and we're trying to get close to failure, what does failure actually feel like? If you've never been in the gym yourself, what do you like? You don't know what it feels like if you've never felt it yourself. So it's very hard for you to get the point across, but also understand the reactions that you're seeing from your patient in front of you when they are getting closer to failure, or if they're actually just not close to failure because they're just cruising.
Yes.
And it's the same thing, no doubt, with your running coaching. When you haven't been a runner yourself and they're talking about their cadence and their PBs and how much volume they're doing and their taper and all these type of things. If you haven't done it yourself, it's somewhat hard to empathize with and understand what they're going through in that time, because the long distance side of things in terms of running and training is tough. And I think it's really tough mentally to cope with. Would you agree?
Absolutely. But, going back to what you said in the gym, it's just that depth of understanding, isn't it? Having learnt the pitfalls, having learnt what's good, having the background of, some of the research, which, doesn't have to go too deep, but just that experience and giving you that depth of understanding. And I think one of the problems is, and you've touched on this in the past as well with some of your other shows, is so many of these things, like if you think about running being the most simple thing you can do, how complicated is it these days? It's made out to be so complicated with the training or the magical training program you have to have, the shoes you have to have, the technique of running, these things, like it's so overdone and overcooked, and it is complete bullshit what goes on out there, both in the physio and podiatry world with managing the running athlete. It's so overcooked. But I think what has contributed to that a little bit is the emphasis of being evidence-based. And some people just see that, if it's not proven or there's no research paper on it, it hasn't happened or it's not true, which is completely untrue, as you and I both know. between lifting a weight and taking a step in a running shoe. So I think getting that depth of understanding from being active it's so important, isn't it?
No, definitely. I feel
And
like
don't overcomplicate things.
oh, definitely. You know, a good example is I had this young guy in today, and he's doing his Cert 3 and 4 in personal training, and he, as part of it, he's kind of got himself into this pickle where he's now got sort of shoulder pain, upper back pain, because literally he's trying to keep himself into this perfect posture and like pre-activate all of the muscle tissue before he does certain things and keep this perfect positioning all day. So he's super rigid and the muscle tissue is just getting tired. So he's getting a lot of
tension.
he's got lots of muscle guarding. So, and he's only learned this, that he thinks that he needs to pre-activate and keep perfect positioning from the Cert 3-4 course, which that's another conversation about the quality of that. But
yeah,
you know, he's got himself into this pickle based off some pretty poor advice within that course. And I was like, everything's all good. All you got to do is just let things go. I love the fact that you love the gym and you want to train and all these things, but you're overthinking it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of the position, the weight, like everything you're doing, just lift the bloody weight. Like the position will dictate what muscle tissue is going to do the job, and the muscle is going to do the job, and we can't activate one muscle by itself. Like it's not going to happen like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And you could kind of see him. He's like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, why do I need to like pre-switch on this muscle and that muscle before I do this? Like, just lift the bloody thing, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Everything's been completely overcoached and overcomplicated in the physio and podiatry world. And speaking of, I've got some 5 yes, no, maybe questions for you, and we'll dive into those. So first one, are orthotics overprescribed?
Yes. Orthoses should be prescribed when there's a history of problems relative to asymmetry and or excessive motion. There's got to be a history relative. Totally overprescribed.
Yeah, and further to that, the difference between a custom orthotic and say a just over-the-counter orthotic, should people be going down the route of getting a custom orthotic that's $600-$800 versus one over the counter, and are they that much better than the over the counter one, the custom one?
Okay,
hard
the
question
difference
to answer
is
because it's very nuanced. I get it.
no, it's not, and I'll try and be really succinct about it. The preformed orthoses are very, very poor in the materials they're made from, and they're almost too molded. And this is just a comment off on the side. I have actually developed my own because I was so disgruntled with what was out there. And by using a preform, what you're trying to do is induce small to moderate changes of pressure or foot position. And that's crucial. So the preformed orthoses are so important and so crucial in our practices because small changes have a massive effect on us. So if you're running with 2 to 3 times your body weight, thousands of steps, in kilometers, you only have to tweak a little bit to get a massive change of where your force is going to be directed to, pressures on the foot and ankle, but changes in alignment. So the use of low-level preform orthoses is, I think it's essential in learning how you can help someone, but more importantly, learning your tolerance to those changes. Is that scenario better than just going straight to, let's call it the high ticket item of custom orthoses? I think it is, because I think you can get low to moderate level of support using a good preform if you use it correctly and it's made from really good materials. When someone requires a large degree of control or support, so you've got the 60-year-old person comes in, they've got complete tib post dysfunction, but they don't need surgery. You're looking for quite a high level of support, and that's when often you'll have to use maybe a molded or 3D printed plate at quite a significant level of support. To go to that end of the spectrum straight up, I think is a big call. And I think it's way, way overdone when you don't know how and if you can help, which is a simple concept. And you don't know how that person's going to tolerate the changes.
So you're
So
offloading the offending structure or offending structures, and
yes,
then over time you would wean one out of the orthotic.
you can. In many runners, we do. We use the orthotic as a treatment modality, and then we start to slowly, drop support. And many people actually get out if they're strong enough, for sure. Yeah. So there's sort of a place for both. I think certainly the molded, printed, and custom orthosis is way overdone. And talking about complicating things, one of the things that's happened with podiatry, which you'll be very aware of, I'm sure, is there's a lot of 3D scanning that goes on. There's a lot of plaster work that goes on, and the tech that has crept in has meant that it's now so much more easy for the practitioner to be hands off. And old dudes like me, who are a little bit older and grayer, have a real problem with that, because you need to know how to correct that plate or how to get it perfect for you. But there's an assumption if it's just scanned and printed or pressed in some way, that high level of support is going to be a winner, and it's not the case.
And when you say hands-on, you mean in terms of the orthotic prescription and the changes to that orthotic?
Yes, the modifications you can
Yeah.
make, and that's the point of having good preforms, is you should be able to, and the practitioner should have the know-how of being able to modify and get what you want for the patient. And you should be able to do that in your rooms or overnight even. Yeah, I think that's a really big part of our profession, which is missing and has dropped out of the university courses. I know here in Melbourne, it's certainly very, very thin as far as the hands-on teaching of how to modify appliances for the individual. Yeah. So the tech has crept in and sort of almost taken over. Scan the foot, get the plate done, and here we go. And it costs a bomb.
We're all doomed. AI is going to take over.
Oh, yeah, well, that's it. It's probably just going to go next level, isn't it?
Next question. Have we demonized pronation when it is just a normal part of human gait?
Yes.
Can you
100%.
Can you explain that to the listeners? Because we do have listeners that don't have any medical or health background. So just talk to us about what pronation is, what supination is, and how the foot functions when we are just walking or running or whatever it is.
Sure. So when you strike the ground, your foot will roll in or flatten out somewhat to be mobile and adapt to the surfaces, but also absorb impact. Most importantly, it's about adaptation to the surfaces, in my opinion. So there are a lot of thoughts that if you roll in or flatten out through the inside of your foot too much, that's a problem. But as I said earlier, it's not a problem if you have a history of injuries or issues related to that excessive movement. So for many people, and we see this in the running fraternity a lot, where people roll in and flatten out, but they don't have any problems. You see people with the biggest bunions and degenerative changes, and they don't have any problems or pain, or, there's people who have run 100 miles a week and they're still doing fine. It's only a problem if there's a relative history of having your feet roll in and splay out and become flatter, which is the pronation you refer to. If there's a problem or a history of issues associated with it. Is it demonized and overcooked? Totally, 100%.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's it. And never underestimate how good you are as a human adapter to your scenario, to your alignment, your pathway of movement. Never underestimate that. How good you are at adaptation.
Yeah, well answered. Are most running injuries, attributed to runners doing too much too soon?
Yeah, poor training for sure. It takes 3 months from start. If you started running today, it will take you approximately 3 months to really begin strengthening. And we know that with tendon. The second 3 months is when you really start to strengthen up and have good tolerance to loading. So if we're starting running today, you want to have a very slow grind of an increase in a running program to become fitter and stronger over at least that 3 to 6 months. People who think it's going to be 6 weeks, it's not going to happen. It's interesting looking at the literature in 20 to 25 years in cross-country skiing, in cycling, and in distance runners, the people who take approximately 3 to 4 months to increase their mileage and then hold it for a 6 to 7 month period from starting that. So let's say we've had, fractures or injuries and we've had a break. The first 3 or 4 months is gradually increasing. We reach a certain level of volume of training. If we can hold that and make 6 to 7 months, your performance goes through the roof, but those people report like minimal incidences of injury versus the person who thumps their chest and thinks they're ready for a marathon at 6 weeks. It's a long grind, and that's the hardest thing. And it's patience.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you got to be patient and you got to do the time.
Yeah.
You can't, I think around this time up here in Sydney, we've had the City to Surf about a month ago, and we've got the marathon this
Sydney
weekend.
Marathon. Yeah.
And it always shocks me that, and it's no fault of their own. They probably just don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, but they come in for 4 weeks before it or 6 weeks before and like, oh, what should I do? I want to run. I want to run the marathon. Like next year, you mean, or this year?
Exactly. I was going to say which one. It's just like Paris next year. Yeah,
it's madness. It's madness.
And it doesn't matter what age you are and really your history, that slow adaptation is crucial. It doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 56. It doesn't matter. You've just got to do the grind.
Yeah. And I think one of the big mistakes people make as well, and we've talked about this on the podcast before with Ali Pashley, is people not doing enough of their kilometers or mileage at a slow pace. So many friends of mine will start, or patients of mine will start off running and they'll do every single run really hard.
Yeah.
So talk to the listeners about what you should do in terms of your running mileage and kilometers going forward, and how many of those kilometers should you be doing at more of a slower pace? And are you using the methodology or the framework of the Zone 2 training to kind of build up tolerance over time?
So to put it even more simple than that for everyone, rule number 1 is consistency at a low level. So you might start with 20 minutes every second day and then go 2 days on, 1 day off, and that might go to 30 or 40 minutes, 2 days on, 1 day off, and so on. But number 1 is consistency. It doesn't mean run Sunday and then run Thursday. It means run Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then start again. It means it has to be consistent. Otherwise you don't adapt. And you would know that from your strength work. It's useless going to the gym on Monday and then turning up on Friday. It's pointless. You have to be really consistent with doing something in between. So that consistency, rule number 1, is of utmost importance to turn on your adaptation. Number 2 is increasing your volume. And this is an interesting one, which fits in with the tendinopathies and the show you did with Jill. Increasing your volume has to happen so slow, so you can have that slow grinding increase in training to reach 3 to 4 months. Because at 3 to 4 months, that's when your tendons will really start to turn on and become stronger. We know that it takes that long. So increasing volume is rule number 2, but that has to be so slow. And it's interesting looking at tendon and tissue stress with loading. I can't recall the study off the top of my head now, but there's 3 studies that actually have reported that the turnover of tendon tissue is so slow, it fits in with approximately increasing running loading 10% per month is the estimate, not 10% per week. So if you can do that, you're going to achieve the long, slow adaptation while you increase your volume. And that is really playing the long game. And that's what counts. And it seems that the people who do that, they come out the other end and they're not injured and their performances are through the roof. So that's, I think it's a bit of a fallacy that we often hear, and you would hear this all the time about 10% a week or whatever it is. I recently heard a lecture from a biomechanist from the US, and he was saying that, and I completely disagreed. And he just basically got up at this meeting and just said that we don't really know what the ideal increase in running volume should be per week or per month. It could be 10, 20% or 50% per week. And I remember sitting there thinking, no, we do know. So the people who think it's going to be really accelerated are completely wrong when we talk about tissue stress. So training in that regard becomes the number one factor in injury prevention, which is crucial. Yeah.
So if someone's, say, doing 20 kilometers a week and they've slowly built it up to that point and they're coping really well and they've held that 20 kilometers a week for the last month and a half or something like that, you would then progressively increase their running volume over time, but you probably are going to err on the side of caution and go for, say, a 10% increase per month
over 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, some people might just bring it back to 3 weeks instead of a month, but yeah. And in the early stages, you're not going to go 20, 22. Most people would go 20, 25.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then they might hit 30, but then like things might slow down a little bit around about 30 or 40 Ks. Yeah. But it has to be that slow. Yeah. Number 3 in those rules is intensity. So the rules go 1, 2, 3, consistency, volume, intensity, and everyone wants to go 2, 3, and 1. So if you're not strong enough, you can't do the intense work. That's the simple answer. So the intense work is all your tempo runs and any interval sessions. You've got to be strong enough to cope with that. And that's what brings people into the revolving door, isn't it? People just increasing their volume or intensity way beyond their capabilities.
It's so true. I've got a couple of longer distance athletes at the moment, and when they start to do a lot more volume over a period of time, you see them regularly, probably for 9 months, and you kind of just patching them up in a way, being like, let's make these modifications, let's get you maybe doing some strength training, and then they come back again with another niggle, and then maybe after 9 months, closer to 12 months, then you don't see them for a few years.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a good way to think of it, slowly building things up, and that 3 month to 4 month mark is a good way to frame it with patients. I like that. That's a good way to sort of have more of a long-term view of it. And I'll say this with strength-based stuff, it's gonna, if you do 2 sessions a week for the next 3 weeks, you're not going to see a huge change.
Yeah.
If at all. Yeah, you might feel a little bit stronger, maybe be able to do a few more reps, but you're not going to put on 2 inches on your bicep in that time, or 2 inches around your thigh or whatever. So it's a long, slow process.
Yeah.
And it's always kind of depressing as well, how quickly you lose it compared to building it.
Oh, yeah. I've read something recently about being 40 to 45 years of age as a runner. If you miss 2 weeks, depending on what sort of shape you're in, you can lose up to like 30 to 40% of your cardiovascular output and your bulk and power. I'm not sure how true that is, but it was like basically saying significant, when you're in your 40s after 2 weeks.
Moral of the story, when you go overseas for 4 or 5 weeks, probably if you're a runner, you probably should be doing some running.
Just doing a little bit. Exactly. Yeah. It's a good point to make about the training side of things and injury prevention. I had a chat with Matthew Clark, who made the Tokyo Olympics in the steeple. He's a podiatrist in South Australia, and told me he hasn't been injured for 8 years.
Wow. That is impressive.
It's really, his technique is impeccable. He has the most beautiful technique, and from technique comes lower limb and good foot function naturally without any, intervention. But the consistency is everything. And he's obviously had that ability to increase the volume and just become so efficient, which is really, really cool. And I was going to say, he'll end up in Paris next year too.
Speaking of running technique, I was going to ask the question, is running technique overcoached in the rehabilitation field? And no doubt you're going to say yes there. Now, after answering yes to that, so with running coaching and technique, what are some of the things that people can do that will no doubt optimize their running, but also reduce their risk of potential injury going forward?
Yeah, good question, because I think in the rehab field, it is overcoached and made really complicated. Hold your arm at this angle, your hips got to be at this angle, your foot plant's got to be in that position. It's like, holy shit, how could you think about this when you're running? Seriously.
Let alone running with a ball involved. If you're playing a sport,
exactly.
I'm going to make sure my arm swings perfect while I'm thinking about heading this soccer ball into the net.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good point though. How quick were the girls to watch at the World Cup? They're running. How fast were they? Unbelievable.
Mary Fowler, Courtney Vine.
Lightning.
You can just see that. I always see, and you probably would do the same as well, when you see an athlete that's just got it, they've got that fast twitch, they're twitchy, they're quick. Mary Fowler and Courtney Vine have that. I remember when Vine used to come on during the World Cup, and I'm just like, she's just so twitchy, and you can tell she's a real legitimate athlete. She would have been
fast
good at
twitch.
sprints, fast twitch,
just on edge. Exactly. So going back to your question, yes, it's well overcooked in the rehab circles, but interestingly, running technique is so poorly coached and identified at the state, national, international level. It's one of my big, I suppose, issues to observe. There's a group here in Melbourne, and there's another group in Sydney there who are at the top of their field. They are competitive in the world-class level. And many of them still could improve with their technique. Technique brings efficiency and an economy of movement, but we also know running technically well reduces the load on the lower limb substantially, especially lower limb and particular calf and Achilles. So it is very, very poorly coached in the track and field circles, and it's just amazing how you just continually see these people run around, and they're great athletes, but there's a lot missing. And you will be able to recognize this and go back and watch any race at Budapest recently, the world champs. And the top 3, top 5 are just so beautiful to watch, and technically are just amazing. And there's all these common characteristics there, like this high and close arm carriage. So there's an economy. They're not swinging around. They stand tall with their hands up, and that's a crucial thing. And my 2 tips for people, if they're listening to this, is if you want to run technically better, think about standing tall and hold your hands up. Grab your T-shirt near your shoulders and just have your hands dance around in front of your chest. If your hands are low, you'll run low, and that you'll lean forward and you have poor knee lift and the load goes up. The interesting thing is with lower limb and foot, and I've been shot down about this over a decade consistently, in that if you run technically well and you're tall with your hands up and over the ground a lot lighter, you will hit the ground naturally forefoot, midfoot. You don't have to try to strike the ground in a particular position. And if you strike the ground forefoot, midfoot, you will induce your muscular control quicker. And I can't remember the speed that you actually activate, your tendon tension or whatever it is. You'll hit the ground more efficiently. You'll activate your muscular control, which means there is far less movement of the foot, and there's far less impact or acceleration through the lower limb. And it all comes from postural control, being able to hold yourself up. And that's where you guys as, strength coaches and physiotherapists come into play, as far as teaching people to become so much more strong and be able to relay that into a functional setting. But the strength is everything. So the technique side of things is crucial, and teaching people how to do it so they can become posturally aware with their strengthening is just as important. Teaching almost a new skill. The people who are really good with it, though, who are really good listeners, they tend to be able to make really good changes just within 3 or 4 weeks. But it might take them months to be a little bit more automatic. So, yeah, it's certainly overcooked in rehab side of things, but it should be really simple with massive changes at the end.
Yeah, and do you find that if they're more elite, there needs to be more of a focus on technique to squeeze that last little bit out of the lemon, or less?
There needs to be, but they don't want to hear it at the most elite level because everything's going reasonably well and they think everything's fine.
Yeah.
So unless you've got the coach on board and the people around them on board, or you're hopefully, if you're within the circle of the support network around that person, it's a lot easier. But yeah, when you're talking about the pointy end of some of these people, it's pretty hard to make changes, and they don't want to.
And are there any athletes at the moment that were at Budapest in the World Championships that you absolutely love in terms of their technique? Current superstars?
I think Jess Hull is a good example.
Very good example.
Yeah, she's super strong. I mean, you just look at the size of her legs. I mean, she's so strong, but technically brilliant and efficient. And I forgot to mention, actually, the other thing that comes from that efficiency and that technique being really sound is the ability to sprint.
Yeah.
Because if you've got your arms flailing and they're low, and then you try to increase your range of movement, you're going nowhere. The people like, say, Jess Hull, Abby Caldwell's the other one from Melbourne here. Beautiful technique. They can let go from their arms and being held high to increasing their range of movement to increase stride length, which is how you kick home. So, but if you're already flailing and you got your hands low and just moving through a large range, you're not going to be able to sprint from that position. And we saw that with Galen Rupp and Mo Farah over the years from the US, especially at London Olympics, when they walked out on the track. It was like, this is so impressive how beautiful they looked. And they had an obsession with technique and then an obsession with being able to sprint at the end of a 10K. And they were the best in the world.
I was always a big fan of Bakaley.
Oh, same thing. Unbelievable, wasn't it? Just economy.
Recently at the World Championships, I've never seen a runner that reminds me more of Roadrunner, as in the Roadrunner and Coyote, than Sha'Carri Richardson.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I saw that. Yeah.
I feel like her torso just stays dead upright and
Vertical.
she's just like moving. And then if you took a photo of her from like here up or a video, she'd just be like cruising along and her legs are just going over it so quickly. Because she's only, I think she's like 5'3" or something like that.
Small,
she's
really
tiny.
small. Yeah.
And then Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce is 5 foot or 5'1", I think.
Yeah.
It's crazy how fast they can move at that height.
But great point you made, because the thing about running technique is being able to, especially sprinting, is being able to hold solid. So every bit of energy you're putting through the ground is going to be relayed through a solid body to propel you. And
you're not losing energy.
Yeah. So the more solid you are, the better you'll be. No different to cycling, keeping still.
And you mentioned the midfoot, forefoot strike, but what you're not saying is that everyone has to land on their forefoot and their midfoot, because a lot of people will still heel strike, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially if that's what they've done their whole life.
If we talk about technique, you can induce a more efficient foot function by running posturally better. If people are striking heavily on the ground, usually it's because of their poor postural control, and they'll tend to move more passively. when they strike the ground by landing more on the rear foot. And that's where observing people between standing, walking versus running can be completely different scenario. So if you've got someone in your rooms, you're looking at them standing or just walking up and down the hallway, and they're rolling in or splaying out and pronating like we were talking earlier, that could be a completely different scenario when they go outside and run up and down, because they tend to activate their muscular control. So what I was saying is, if you are more posturally efficient, you are more likely to naturally strike the ground forefoot, midfoot, which is far better than striking the ground in the rear foot because of impact and muscular control.
It's also interesting watching people run versus sprint. And often when they sprint, everything gets tidied up just by the fact that they're sprinting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They have to run in that sort of Aquinas position, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
The
Exactly.
forefoot.
Speaking of that forefoot, midfoot style, so if, say, someone was a heel striker and they wanted to transition into more of your midfoot, forefoot type of strike, how long would you predict that that's going to take, and how slowly should you do it?
So if I took you outside and taught you how to run technically better, that won't take too long. That'll take a few minutes. But to practice it, that will take 3 months to become really good at it and a bit more relaxed and automatic with it, instead of, how can you say, more active and sort of purposeful with holding that posture. So you can make quick changes, but it's a few months before, it's going to be really efficient. Certainly several weeks, as I said earlier, but 3 or 4 weeks, a lot of people are really good by then. But it does need months for sure. Should we do it slow? I think that is part of the sort of few months of adaptation. Making the change, but realizing it's going to take you a few months of adaptation. You might get a bit of calf soreness and tightness and that, but you just keep going with the best postural control you can. And it does always get back to that postural control. So this is my thing with the physios, working with podiatrists or whatever, the physios. Physiotherapy has to be really aware at bringing on the strengthening and activating good postural control, but then relaying that to the activity and teaching technique. So, and again, around the athlete, all the people around the athlete or the systems around that person, it's just another thing that everyone's got to be on board with. Parents watching junior run, reminding them to stand tall, the coach, you as a physio, me as the podiatrist or whoever it is. Yeah. It's important to have that constant feedback.
You've touched on shoes before.
Yeah.
Let's dive into shoes, because this is a bit of a polarizing topic, but it's also a very interesting topic when you talk to patients about it, because they'll often think that, buying a new pair of running shoes will make up for a pretty shitty running plan, or too much running volume, or they've done too much too soon. Oh no, I'll just go buy the new set of Asics or Hokas or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that'll fix it. Dive into
Go
shoes.
straight into the vapor flow. It's going to make you run faster.
Let's dive into all of that. So what type of shoes would someone be looking for if they are wanting to get into running? And what are the type of shoes that you might race in? What are some things to look out for? And what are some mistakes not to make?
Yeah, well, we've just done 3 episodes on footwear on the Simply the Best Podiatry podcast. And we were talking about how the trends from the shoe companies, wherever they start from, I don't know, but the trends drive so much. And if we again go back to considering running to be really simple, we have just 10 years ago, we had the thin, flexible, no heel height, minimalist barefoot shoes. So you remember that.
Yeah.
We had Nike
Vibra and
Frees,
Five Fingers, they got sued because of false advertising. And
yeah. So there's certainly that range of shoes, the flat sort of minimalist shoes. There's certainly a good effective strengthening that seems to come with that. There's no doubt. So if you walk or run around barefooted or in minimalist shoes, a lot of reports show that you only have to run in them twice twice a week for 30 minutes, and you'll get the strengthening benefits of your calves. Stronger your calves, less shin pain, less tibial load, and things like that. So that was an interesting phase, but every shoe company got on board, and what they started teaching people and the practitioners then followed suit. So all of a sudden there's this vortex. The practitioners are driving the marketing of the shoe company, and one is feeding off the other, and then the consumer's in the middle of it, and it's just going round and round, feeding off one another. And it was all bullshit. Because what came out of that was the concept of teaching you to strike the ground running in your thin, flat shoes. You have to strike the ground forefoot, midfoot, with total disregard that comes from good postural control. So there was all these people running around as they were, actively changing their foot position, and that just created so much calf, Achilles, and plantar foot pain that would come into our rooms.
Stress fractures
of the metatarsals, yeah. So that was an interesting time, and I was involved in that a little bit, but the support was, this is okay from a strength point of view, but you need to do it just very minimally. There are some benefits for sure. But then now, if you consider where we are with the super shoes, or the super thick, fat, soft shoes, well, they're also super lightweight. They feel amazing.
Describe what you mean around the super shoes for the listeners.
The super shoes are the shoes on the market, which everyone will be aware of when they go to a shoe store, and the shoe is like 30 millimeters thick. And it's like the shoes are blown out. They're bigger than we've ever seen before. So they're thicker, they're softer, and they are super light. But there's a few problems with that. And one in particular, which is not spoken of at all in our circles, but certainly from the shoe companies, you'll never hear it. As soon as you run in those thick, soft shoes, you can't feel the ground. So you remove your natural sensory perception, which means you tend to passively hit the ground. And what comes out of that is more impact and less activation of your muscular control. So people are subject to more load, and they tend to move more. The only people who tend to respond well with the thicker, softer shoes are the ones who are strong enough to cope with it, and the ones who have adapted to it. And usually they're people with high volumes of loading in their training, and they're strong enough to be able to cope with those changes that the shoes induce. Some of the shoes have the plates inside them, the carbon plates, and they do feel amazing to run in because there's a spring effect, and they feel like you can run the house down so much quicker. And I've got no doubt you definitely run a little quicker in them. Not a whole lot, but a little. And there's also a fair bit of reporting about running in thicker, softer shoes. There's less muscle soreness generally. Like runners report there's less delayed onset muscle soreness. And if that's the case, maybe they can run a little more, and maybe that's a good spin-off. But we're talking about the top percentage of strong distance runners who have had, years of mileage. For the average person who's just going to run 30, 40 Ks a week, or let's say 5 Ks every day or something like that, where is the simple, neutral, firm shoe in the middle ground? They're actually hard to find now, because it's all been taken over with the thick, soft shoes. And it doesn't matter what brand you look at, they're all doing the same. And my list that I would give a patient in my rooms of my shoes to go and choose from has dwindled from the simple, conventional, sort of firm, neutral list, has dwindled from like 20 shoes to about 6. So the shoe companies, they've not focused on that sort of, let's call it conventional firm shoes, which is what everyone should be in if they're starting off running or just running their 5 Ks every day. So this is going to be important for the shoe stores to grasp or maintain a little bit as well, because the shoe stores are a bit of an issue with being in the vortex or the pocket of the shoe companies and driving the whole marketing of, the trends that we see. But for the runner listening, if they can stick to firm, neutral shoes and a conventional sort of style, which we've always had, which will generally be about maybe 18 to 20 mil in the rear foot and maybe 10 at the front. There might be 8 to 10 millimeters of heel lift in it. That would be the ideal shoe for almost everyone. You can find them out there, but don't go to the thin, flat shoes, and certainly don't go to the big, thick, soft shoes. Try and stay in the middle if you can, as a general rule.
I guarantee a lot of people will be looking at their shoes right now and thinking, what the hell have I done?
Yeah. Spent like $300 on my big fat slipper, which feels amazing, but it's not going to be good for them.
They're ugly too, aren't they?
Oh, everyone talks about that, but they still go and purchase them.
They're filthy looking. You won't get me purchasing one of those. They're disgusting.
Yeah. So it's a complex field, isn't it? The whole footwear sort of world is, again, like we were saying about other things earlier, is blown up to be so complex. But it doesn't need to be.
When you're looking at injury rates, though, chunky heeled shoes really only started to becoming in existence back in the late 70s, early 80s, and injury rates really haven't changed since the advent of them.
They haven't.
So what is the ideal scenario for a runner? Is it, because prior to then, people were running in Dunlop Volleys and Onitsuka Tigers and flat shoes that didn't have a heel, that didn't have a drop, at 8 to 10 mil drop.
More natural,
exactly. So that then induced a more natural running gait, just purely by the fact that you couldn't slam your heel down into the ground because you don't have that cushioning underneath the heel. So invariably what we've done is we've forced people into these chunky heeled shoes that are now running in a less natural way, which has not changed injury rates at all.
It hasn't at all, yeah.
So it's like, well, what are we trying to do here? I feel like we're just going around that hamster wheel.
We are.
Just making some shit up that isn't necessarily working or helping.
It's completely the shoe companies and marketing. And everyone just gets on board and thinks it's so wonderful to be associated. Completely. So what you said about going back to the little tiger shoes in 1970, that was what I was getting at with the sensory perception of the surface.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there's much more reporting now. But still, that sensory perception, I think, clinically is a massive issue in bringing in or causing problems in people striking the ground so much more passively. And it's never spoken about. But I was just going to say, for anyone listening, all they have to do is run down the hallway of their house barefoot, then put their runners on the other end and run back, and you can feel the difference. That's what we're talking about, that sort of human feeling. You can understand as soon as you do it.
It's an interesting point about feeling the ground. So I would probably compare it in a way to different golf shoes I've had over the years. And I've got more of a golf shoe that's kind of like a jogger at the moment. It's a little bit smaller in terms of the cushioning. Previously, I've gone to one that's had a little bit more cushioning, I suppose, for supposed comfort. But I didn't like it as much because I felt too high. I felt too far away from the ground. And traditionally, when I was younger, I actually preferred not wearing golf shoes. I actually wore cricket shoes because cricket shoes felt lower to the ground. And I felt better with that because it kind of makes sense. Like you're pushing into the ground and the ground's pushing back and you're creating a club head speed because of it. So I've gone that sort of full circle now, and I've gone back to a more sort of, it's like a cricket shoe kind of, that's got a few spikes in it. And it's funny as well. Like I have often preferred in the last 5 years to wear a shoe that's spikeless versus spiked, because the spiked shoes that have the rubber spikes lift you up off the ground a little bit more. So the spikeless is closer to the ground. So pretty much your foot is closer to the actual surface of the ground. So, and they've become more and more popular in golf, especially on the world tours, of players playing in
Right.
spikeless. And I think a lot of it's due to the fact that the spikeless shoes are now better in terms of grip, for one, because the technology is better. But I also think that they like the feeling of their foot gripping the ground
In
and being able to
contact.
create force into the ground rather than pushing into all this spongy stuff.
Right. Okay. So flatter is more stable and more grippy because of the surface area.
Flatter feels more stable, and your traditional type of golf shoe is quite flat, and traditionally it would have spikes, and then they went to the sort of the rubber spikes that are kind of like sort of like a spider in a way,
Yeah.
touching the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
And so, but now we've kind of shifted to this point where a lot of them are using spikeless, which is interesting because they like the feeling, I think, of
Yeah.
being connected, like
Gone
you were
full
saying.
circle as well.
Yeah, it's
It's
interesting.
amazing, isn't it? And then it's amazing technology and materials we have around us, but sometimes it does overcomplicate things. I mean, look at your golf clubs. It's endless, probably what you could, head into
Oh,
and
it's ridiculous.
try this.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
They have changed to a degree, but yeah, the last 10 years, really 10, 15 years haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, just on another topic, and you touched on this on one of your shows recently. You were talking about stretching, and I loved the way that you spoke about that in saying that I think it was with Hayden who you had on, and both of you said yes, stretching is not that useful. It's not cooked up to what it is to be. So do you advise people at all to do just some stretching, or is it just massage is the thing? Where do you
Yeah.
stand
So,
on that? I mean,
so
really
with,
interested.
with stretching, I won't ever prescribe stretching, put it that way, where I'm like, you have to do stretching.
Right.
I will say, if you like stretching and you find that it helps you, you can do it.
Yeah.
But at least the patient should know what's happening when they stretch. So there was a recent study by Panidi that came out this year, so 2023, and it showed that under 15 minutes of stretching per week for less than 10 weeks had no change at all on
Yeah.
the muscle architecture. So we've known that for ages, that when you stretch for periods of time, you're not seeing a change in the length of the muscle. It's just a neurological change where you're increasing your tolerance to stretch over time.
Right.
So
Okay.
stretching just becomes, I suppose, easier, and you can tolerate a stretch. It doesn't hurt as much, and then you can go further. But then if you stop stretching, you will kind of revert back to where you were previously if you don't continue to do it. But this meta-analysis showed us that if you stretch for greater than 15 minutes per week per muscle for at least 10 weeks, or you use high intensity stretching where you hold the stretch for a stretch where it's super painful. Imagine I pushed you into like a hamstring stretch and you're like nearly screaming.
Yeah.
We see small but definite changes in the muscle fascicle length.
Right.
So, but it's still negligible. Like, you're not seeing big changes.
Yeah.
The other thing is, yeah, you might be seeing muscle fascicle changes, but what does that mean? What are we
Yeah.
achieving with that?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's really a pillar of health that people should be focusing on too much. But if they want to do it and they find that it helps, go for it.
Sure.
Because I think back in, when I was playing football and these things growing up as a kid, that was back in the 90s when, everyone kind of was doing some static stretching before they would train.
Yeah.
And I still have a lot of athletes that want to do that before they exercise and before they play and before they train. And look, I have no problem with it. There is that research to suggest that reduces strength and power output if you hold a stretch long enough, but a small 30-second stretch for a while, I have no issues with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you want to do a calf stretch for 30 seconds prior to you going and doing your dynamic, FIFA 11 plus footy first type of reducing injury risk warm up, we'll go for it. That's not going to affect you. But if you're holding a really intense stretch for 2 minutes, say on your calf and your hamstring, maybe that's going to reduce your strength and power output, which would be a negative consequence that you don't want for your sport.
So that's interesting. So you're talking about overstretching or increased stretching is not beneficial and actually detrimental to your power
detrimental to
output.
power and strength output. So
That's interesting.
yeah, I would never put a focus on stretching, but then you get your yogis that come in and your ballerinas and your gymnasts and stuff that want to stretch and they like stretching. They kind of need to stretch because they push their bodies into these ridiculous positions and they need it for their sport. Well, for them, it's different. So it's less about what we're achieving with the stretch from a physiological standpoint. It's more about them pushing their body to those ranges that they need for their sport.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of that change is neurological change that they want to hold on to. But I think the other thing about it is people don't talk about this enough. One's mobility or flexibility is predetermined by genetics. You can improve it if you want. That's fine. Go for it. But if you have a deeper hip socket and your acetabulum is deeper than someone that's more shallow and got more of a dysplastic or a dysplasia type of hip, well, obviously the person that's got a shallow hip socket will probably be able to move their hip a little bit more than someone that's got a deeper hip socket.
Yeah, sure.
And that's predetermined by genetics. You can't change that. Like that's literally your bone. You can't go in and like,
architecture,
well, you could. It's your bony architecture. You could go in and shave it off and open the space up a bit if you wanted to, but you're not going to do that. So like I'm a good example. My hip mobility is pretty shit and I would have been a terrible gymnast. And that's one of the reasons why I went to other sports.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I'll tell patients as well is if they come in and they say to me, I need to stretch, I need to increase my mobility because my mobility is really poor. I'll explain to them that a lot of it's predetermined by genetics. And I'll also tell them that based off the research that we have, the mobility changes one will see if they do mobility training versus strength training are exactly the same. But the mobility training, they're not getting any of the benefits of the strength training. But the strength training, they're getting all these amazing benefits.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like do strength training and that's going to cover your mobility. If you want to do a little bit of mobility and flexibility work at home, do it, but it's not like a super important part of your health going forwards. And you can do it at home by yourself. Pretty easy stuff to do in front of the TV while you're watching the news.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I know I've read, and I couldn't tell you where, and this is just a few years ago. I know I've read that the more distance runners stretch, the more injured they are. And I wonder whether it's what you just said about the loss of power and stability.
Look,
Possibly.
it could be that, but maybe it's also there's only so many hours in the day. And if they're focusing on stretching, they're reducing their mental ability to cope with other stimulus in their life. They're wasting a bit of time and they could be using that time for things that are more beneficial, like load management, planning their week, better nutrition, the strength training, more sleep. You know, this is something people never talk about, just sleep more. Like as an athlete, if you're going to do anything for recovery, just sleep more. You know, the more sleep you get, the better. And that's been shown multiple times in amazing studies on tennis players and college athletes. You know, it's a no-brainer. Like this morning, I had to get up at 5 o'clock because I had an early patient at 6 a.m. And I probably got 7 hours, maybe just under 7 hours.
I would never
of sleep.
do that.
As in that early?
No.
Yeah, no. I'm a bit too
nice.
This
goes back to our work-life balance.
Yeah. But I'm sitting here right now talking to you on a podcast, so my life isn't too bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm playing tennis at 3:30, 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah.
Now, I've noticed a difference over the years. If I get under 7, my performance is definitely worse. And there was a good a good basketball study done on that on free throws where they compared, I think it was 5 hours of sleep versus 8 hours sleep, and the performance like exponentially dropped with the group that was 5 hours.
Right.
So I've noticed a difference. And any athlete will, you know, I ask multiple questions often with an athlete when they walk in and we're training. And the 4 big ones for a female are, how do you feel out of 10? 10 out of 10 is you feeling amazing. You're top of the world. How many hours sleep did you get last night? And how stressed are you out of 10? And that'll dictate probably what we do in terms of how intense the session is. And then the
Right.
fourth
Okay.
one with women that I don't ask men, obviously, is where are you at in your menstrual cycle?
Yeah.
Which
Sure.
will, again, dictate things, because a lot of women around their PMS week will feel pretty shitty and we might not want to push them as much. So questions like that will often dictate what we do. And they're good questions to ask yourself prior to an exercise bout or a sporting event or something like this. And often those questions you ask yourself will often help you understand why you performed like you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's quite simple, isn't it? When you consider it like that.
super simple.
Simple consideration. Yeah.
And the stress that one feels in their life, that be work stress, body stress from training or whatever it is, life stress, lack of sleep, these things, all of this stress, it's still stress. You know, if
Sure.
you've got too much
Cumulative.
stress, it's accumulative. If you've got too much stress, there's a greater chance that you'll get injured. There's a greater chance that you're probably going to perform pretty poorly. And there was
Sure.
that great college athlete study where they try to figure out where college athletes would get injured during the season, whether it was off season, preseason, in season, at the start of season. And it kind of flatlined most of the year, except there was a big spike in exam week every semester.
Oh, really? Okay.
It makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
they're more stressed. They got more life stress.
Yeah.
They're probably not sleeping as much because they're up all night studying and cramming for exams. So, and their performance was no doubt affected as well. So
Sure.
you're burning the candle at both ends in a way.
Yeah. So this gets on to what we were talking about earlier about practitioner management and the work-life balance.
Yeah.
You can't maintain your passion with your physiotherapy, and I can't in my field if we're not level and can get connected with the person in front of you, and you just become one of the 50% within the 5 years. There's not enough spoken about, I think, in our world, our worlds of physiotherapy, podiatrists, about how to manage yourself, because you know that, you know, dealing with people, it's a constant thing. You're also obviously almost giving off energy, but you need to realize that you've got to keep this balance going on, because you're going to get sick, or you're just useless, or you're going to get disgruntled, and certainly not do your job with passion. And it tends to be really interesting with the physiotherapists and podiatrists just running yourself into the ground from a really young age. And it's certainly not spoken about too much at all. I mean, you would have seen this.
Burnout's a massive issue for sure. And finding that sweet spot of seeing enough patients and not going too far that you burn yourself out, it's tricky, because obviously there's a commercial viability in terms of you being an employee within the business.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to see enough patients to bring in enough money for them to pay you and for them to want you there long term.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, but you need to find that sweet spot. And for me going forward, so I've got Nick who works for me, and I'm going to put on another physio soon. And my goal with them is to not work full-time hours in the clinic. I would, at the moment, Nick has, he was going to get to the point where he has 3 hours up his sleeve of admin hours. And then I'm thinking about actually pushing it to a 32-hour clinical week and a 5 hours of admin up your sleeve to catch up on notes and letters and all this type of stuff.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's, it is tricky, because I personally get to the end of the day, especially if it's a long day, and I'm done. I don't really want to talk to anyone.
Yeah.
I'm happy sitting down watching some sport or watching something ridiculous like Botch, the TV show. I watched some of that last night. It's great.
Real fun guy, hey, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm that guy that I just want to just chill. I want to exercise, chill. I don't really like going out for dinner and that sort of stuff during the week too much, because I feel empty. I feel like I've given.
Right. And this is 15 years of practice, did you say?
12.
12, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And each to their own. Like, I feel like as a kid, I was probably a little bit more of an introvert. I've forced myself to be more extroverted over time, and I've gotten better at doing that. But at the end of the day, I still get to that point where I feel like I've listened so much to everyone that I just need time to just get back to neutral.
And it's also like, you know, if you think about what you've done, like with your footy and your aspirations, and you obviously have been quite driven, and, you know, things are like go, 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 like we're forging ahead with every single thing that you've touched or, made up and made work for you, like your practice and maintained your sporting background. It's pretty hard to let go of that person who's driven and making things work and, being really productive. It's really hard to step off that sort of treadmill of being that person.
Oh,
So
definitely.
it's interesting.
I
That's why I asked how many years, because, and again, we're bringing you into your listeners' living room, Andrew, which is great.
I should start paying you for this.
No, but it's so nice to hear about it, and it does relate to everybody. But I had a really interesting perspective from being really sick last year, and I'm now 56. Doesn't sound right, but I am. Still feels like 36.
You don't
There's
look
a lot of good
56.
reasons why it still feels like 36. That's another show. But what I was going to say, I got really sick last April with COVID. So I had virus. I had the classic post-viral, weeks and months of trying to get over it. And I was so aware of not being one of those people who's like 6 months down the track going, oh, holy shit, I'm still flat. So I was in bed for 2 weeks, got out. Took me 7 weeks to click one day and think, I think I'm right. And I purposely went back to work and did 3 days a week, 10 till 2. And it was all about me. The whole thing was about me. I was not going down that slippery slope of, going to be flat for 6 to 12 months, like many people and many athletes we've seen. So I didn't exercise for 4 months. Did nothing. I was going for a few surfs, catching 3 waves, bang, on the beach, sit there and watch my sons or whatever. And so after 4 months, I started riding again, just gently, started surfing a whole lot more, doing my usual things. And I never went back to work more than 3 days a week for 12 months. And the only thing I can say to you and everyone listening is it just gave me amazing perspective of how good I could get myself and maintain or even regenerate that passion for people and get that energy back. And you're in your 50s. It was amazing. And I said to myself, I'm going to do this for 12 months. And I managed to pull it off for 12 months. I don't know how. And so now I do 3 1 week, 4 days the next, 3 and 4. And I can make that work, and I think I can maintain it. But there's this amazing, how can I say, sense of being certainly calmer, more productive, more connected to people. Certainly, I would say better in my day when I'm with other people and trying to help them out, and certainly regenerated that passion.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because there was that study, I forget who it was by, that in terms of your ability to concentrate and focus on a task, you're capping out for the week at about 30 hours.
Yeah, okay.
So
that makes sense.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Because I feel like
totally.
Currently at the moment, I'm still really busy, but I don't have any football on at the moment. So I'm in a little bit more of a downtime in terms of how many hours I'm doing for the week. So, during that sort of, what was it, April, May, June, July, August, it was just, 5 to 6 days a week.
Yeah. Just
having work on, but I love it. And there were days where I was a bit cooked. And it's funny though, when you are in it, that's all you know.
Yeah.
And when you leave it and the football was finished, then I started to feel a little rundown. I didn't feel rundown during it. I didn't feel run down at all during it, because I was like, I just got to get going, keep on going, push it out.
Yeah.
Get it done. But after it, I started to get that kind of lag.
Right. Okay. Guilt
delayed.
Trip? Were you on the guilt trip of not doing enough?
That
or not being driven?
I've been terrible at that over the years, where I feel guilty in a way of not working. When I think that gets shoved down our throat a little bit too much of
totally.
You have to work hard to get anywhere in life. And yeah, I agree. You have to work hard, and you've worked hard in your life, and so have I. But there is often a lot of luck involved with some people. even your example with the media stuff, you fell into that in a way,
Yeah.
and it was a really good thing for your career going forwards. It regenerated your love for podiatry by the sounds of it. And,
Totally.
I feel like I've gotten better at doing that.
Yeah.
And, even some weeks on a Thursday now, I'll try and play golf on Thursday and not do too much work, if at all. I will try and have that day as admin
Sure.
day / play golf or something like
Yeah.
that. And then
Yeah.
this afternoon, I'm playing tennis, and if someone needs a Friday afternoon appointment, surely there's another day during the week that they can fit in a session with me
Yeah.
that I'm available. So rather than being like, oh yeah, no worries, I'll do that. And
Yeah.
then you just kind of get the shits and you're like, oh, I'm working more than I need to. And
Exactly. So what you said is, you're talking about working hard. It's more important, I think, to balance hard.
yeah,
You can work hard, and when we're on, we are on
yeah,
completely 100% or more, but you've got to balance hard.
yeah. You got to find that sweet spot, and
Yeah.
it takes
Make an effort.
takes time to find that sweet spot,
Yeah.
but don't get burnt out. I think Ebony put it really well in the podcast I did with her and Jill. She said too many physios leave the profession, and it'd be the same in podiatry. Don't leave the profession, change your job, not your career.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I loved that. There's
Yeah.
always an alternative, and you don't have to work 4 days a week or 5 days a week. You could work 3 and you go and do something else on the side.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
You don't have to be seeing 60 patients a week. No one's forcing you. No one has a gun to your head telling you you have to do that. I feel
Yeah.
like people get sucked into that. And I now at Wild Physio, we do sort of split shifts, like on Monday, I'll work 6:30 to about 1:30. And Nick comes in from 12, we do a meeting, and then he works up until about 6:30. And then the
Sure.
next day we kind of swap. So then you have more work-life balance. And that's one of the reasons why I like the early mornings, because this morning at 5 a.m. I did not like that alarm at all. I did not want to get
Yeah.
up at that time, but I was super efficient this morning. I saw all the patients I needed to. Now I'm doing this podcast with you. By the way, it's been going for over 2 hours, I
I
think.
know. Yeah.
And then I'm playing tennis, so
Yeah.
I've got that ability to have more
Yeah.
balance based off the fact that I'm waking up early and
Sure.
getting some work done.
Yeah. I think what you said then about, being driven and doing the 50 or 60 hours a week or 60 patients a week, I think you said. Do you know those people, those practitioners who are doing that and they've got their head down on the grindstone, they're not the practitioner I want to go and see.
I agree
I
completely.
don't want to go and see that
Yep.
person, massage, physio, podiatrist. I want to see the guy who's more balanced because he's going to have more energy for me. And like what
Agreed.
you just said then, on the grindstone, you have got your head down and your perspective is so far not where it should be. So
I completely
yeah.
agree with that. I've worked in clinics before where it was all about sort of every half an hour, you've got to have a patient
Yeah.
and there's no breaks in between. And with Nick, I say to him all the time, if you've got a patient, whether it be a new or a follow-up, and you need a 15-minute gap after it to write some notes, gather your thoughts, get your shit sorted before your next patient, do it. I need you to do that, because every single person that walks in this door, we want to do the best job possible so that they're the center of attention and we
Absolutely.
help them the best we can. So they're raving about us and they add a 5-star review on Google, etc., etc. Where quality over quantity. It's not bang, 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 bang. It's not one of
So
these mill
important.
clinics.
Yeah.
So it's probably also, probably talking to the young clinicians out there, it's having the balls, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, to ask your boss for these smaller breaks and chunks of time where you can get back up to speed, or ask for some admin breaks and these type of things, because you should not just be doing 38 hours of clinic
No.
hours. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't do that, and I don't plan to ever do that again.
This is a good
too
discussion to
much.
have because it's never
too
spoken
much.
about. Practitioner management, it's never spoken about. So
And
this
it's
is
not lazy.
ideal. No.
It's not lazy, is it?
Yeah, exactly. No, not at all.
I
You're trying
feel
to be
like
the best you can be.
yeah, exactly. And it's draining, like dealing with
Yeah.
people's problems all day. It's draining. Like
Yeah.
my girlfriend is a speech pathologist and she deals with people's problems all day as well. And she deals with parents because she works with kids. And that's hard. And
Mm,
she's the same as me. You know, she'll get back from work after a long day and she's the same. She just wants to just decompress,
chilling out.
just
Yeah.
chill. And rather than just give over and over again. And it's a
Yeah.
tough profession, it is, but there's ways of making it work without getting burnt out to the point where you
Absolutely.
leave the profession, because it is a really rewarding profession if you do
Yeah.
it right.
Balance hard, I say. I had this, I've got to tell you, when I have new grads come through, the questions are fascinating from the young guys, not the women, it's the guys. And they want to
Really?
question, they ask you, or I get this all the time, how come you only see 2 patients an hour and not 3 or 4?
Yeah.
Like, fuck, mate. Like, is this where you're thinking and you just come out of college? How much does it cost you to have, your admin assistant or the rooms you're leasing or whatever? It's like, holy shit, really? Is this where you're at? They're the
It's
ones
hard.
that
It's hard not to get sucked into the economy of it, you know,
totally.
the economics of it, especially when you're in private practice. You need to make sure it's viable.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you know, I'm in that at the moment. We're looking at expanding and
Mm.
going to bigger premises and blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah, yeah.
you got to make it work. But at the same time, yeah, I agree with that
It's a balance.
it's 100% a balance.
Yeah.
It's
So people like you and I discussing this is so important. It's a big topic for our professions because
yeah,
it doesn't go well at all. It does not go well. 50% in 5 years. It's huge.
it's
Yeah.
terrible. It is absolutely shocking. So, Jason, it's been good fun. I think
Thank
we
you
should
so
probably leave
much.
it there. It's been
I
over
know.
2 hours. I
We'll
haven't
do
done it
this
over
again.
2 hours. I don't think I've done a podcast for over
No,
two
either have
hours for
I.
a long time.
Anyway, we've covered a lot.
We have.
We'll split this up.
For
Yeah.
the listeners out there that have come this far, thank you for listening. It's been a long podcast. Maybe they're going to do it in little chunks where they, 20 minutes, 30
Maybe.
minutes, and then
Yeah,
pause and then
training,
come back to it.
choose. Then there's a practitioner element, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you for talking about yourself. I think it's really nice. And I think it's so good for your listeners to hear about you. It's not done often. And as you know, it's sort of joking in a way, but you have brought that into the living room and that gives a depth of understanding for the people.
Well,
So
thank you
thank
for
you.
asking the
So
questions.
good. And you went really deep and I could see it on your face, what it meant to you, but you had it in perfect perspective as to coming out the other end and being content with where you're at by doing other activities and work and whatever it may be, and working with, having your passion to work with other people, where it stemmed from. So cool.
Well, thank you for taking over the podcast
Oh.
and asking me questions.
So good. Good to hook up with you anyway. And I'm sure we'll chat soon. So I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you again, Jason. It's been good fun.
Yeah.
Let's do it again soon.